Alrighty, so today's story is called Cinderella Penguin by Janet Perlman. So, we read another book this week about the penguin and by this same author. She actually wrote both the books. So, let's read this one, Cinderella Penguin or the Little Glass Slipper. There once was a young penguin named Cinderella who lived in a faraway land with her stepmother and two stepsisters. Cinderella was a kind and gentle penguin, but her stepsisters were selfish and vain. Cinderella did all the chores, and she even had to pick up after her stepsisters while they never had to do a thing. The sisters wore the finest clothes and slept in large, cozy feather beds with silky sheets and fluffy pillows. Poor Cinderella never wore nothing but a worn and out, tattered, and slept in Poor Cinderella wore nothing but worn out tatters and slept in the cold stone cellar up on the small shelf beside some of the old tin plates. One day, it was announced that the Penguin Prince was giving a costume ball. The stepsisters and their mother received an invitation. Cinderella wanted to go too, but they just laughed at her. The prince would never want to meet a shabby cinder block like you. For weeks, the house was filled with talk of the ball. The sisters had costumes made from the finest fabrics. They ate only the tiniest meals so they could have the tiniest waists, and they were always in front of the mirror posing and practicing their curtsy. Finally, the night of the ball arrived. Cinderella rushed about ironing her stepsisters' costumes and helping them dress. Then, without a thank you or goodbye, the carriage swept the stepmother and sisters off to the ball. Cinderella burst into tears. She felt so alone and unhappy. Suddenly, the glow of blue light from the great fairy penguin appeared before her. "Why are you crying, Cinderella? Do you want to go to the ball?" she asked. Cinderella blinked back her tears. "Oh, yes, more than anything." "Then you shall. First," said the fairy penguin, "you must fetch me a pumpkin from the garden." Cinderella didn't know how a pumpkin could help her get to the ball, but she quickly brought her the best one she could find. The fairy gave it a firm tap with a wand, and it magically turned into a beautiful golden carriage. Then the great fairy penguin went into the kitchen and found 6 mice carrying a huge chunk of cheese. With a tap of her wand, they turned into a handsome team of 6 horses. They turned the cheese into a fat coachman in uniform. They all marched out the door and took their place as if they were the most natural thing to do. "Now you can go to the ball. Are you happy, Cinderella?" asked the fairy. "Oh, yes," said Cinderella, but then she sadly looked down at her ragged clothes. "I almost forgot," said the fairy princess. And with a tap of her wand, Cinderella's penguin rags became a beautiful gown with gold trimming and a real gold tiara. On her feet were a pair of glass slippers, the prettiest and most delicate that Cinderella had ever seen. "Now, one last thing," said the great fairy princess. "The magic spell ends at the stroke of midnight. The carriage will turn back to a pumpkin, the horses back to mice, and the coachman into cheese. And you'll again be dressed in rags, so you must leave the ball before midnight." Cinderella promised to remember when waving goodbye. She stepped into the carriage and rode off, her heart filled with joy. When Cinderella arrived at the palace, the ball was in full swing. She was welcomed with a fanfare of trumpets, and she marveled to see so many fine penguins wearing such magnificent costumes. Her stepmother and stepsister didn't notice her. They were too busy gobbling down snacks and party sandwiches at the buffet table. But the Penguin Prince noticed Cinderella at once. "Who is she?" he asked the courtiers. "When she is the most beautiful penguin I have ever seen." Cinderella had never met as handsome and charming a penguin as the prince. From their first dance together, he never left her side. They whirled and twirled around the dance floor to applause the admiring crowd. "Who is this beautiful young penguin who has captured the prince's attention so completely?" everyone whispered. "What a handsome couple! How well they danced together," they sighed. Cinderella had never been so happy. She wished the night could last forever. Then suddenly she glanced up at the clock in all the excitement, and she had completely forgotten the fairy's warning. "Oh," she cried, "it's almost midnight. I have to go." She ran from the palace in such a hurry that one of her glass slippers fell off and was left lying on the step. As Cinderella rode away in the carriage, the prince called out, "Oh, please don't go." But she was gone. He picked up the glass slipper and said, "Who was she? I don't even know her name." The next day it was announced that the prince would marry the penguin whose foot fit into the little glass flipper. There was a great excitement throughout the land. First, all the princesses tried it on and all the penguins of the court, but the flipper was always too small. The royal footmen were commanded to take the flipper house to house. The stepsisters went the whole day perfuming and powdering their feet. "Cinderella," said the stepmother, "your clothes are too ragged to be seen by the royal footmen. Go downstairs and polish the silver until they leave." "Oh, please, I would like to try on the flipper too," said Cinderella, knowing it would fit her perfectly. The stepsisters laughed, but then they looked down at Cinderella's webbed feet for the first time, and they noticed how delicate they were. A knock came at the front door. "Quick, hide her," said the stepsisters. They grabbed Cinderella and threw her down the cellar steps and slammed the door. Poor Cinderella. She lay upside down with her feet caught in the tight in the door, unable to get free. When the footmen came in, the stepsisters pushed and shoved, but to be first to try on the flipper. When they were so intent on snatching the flipper from each other, they made it slip. It slipped from their grasp and flipped high in the air and landed squarely on Cinderella's foot. Everyone stared. It was a perfect fit. As the footman opened the door and helped Cinderella up, the great fairy penguin appeared. With a tap of her magic wand, she transformed Cinderella's tattered rags into a magnificent clothes she had worn to the ball. Cinderella was overjoyed. "Oh, thank you, fairy penguin. I thank you with all my heart." The stepmother and stepsisters' beaks dropped wide open. They stared at Cinderella, sputtering with amazement. "Look! Oh my! It's her! Oh no! Oh dear! We've really put out our foot in it." The Penguin Prince and Cinderella Penguin were married the very next day, and the wedding bells rang throughout the land. Never before had anyone remembered such a joyous and happy wedding. Cinderella and the prince truly loved each other, and they lived happily ever after. So, on Flipgrid, I want you to tell me who was a character in this story, where was part of the story at, or where did some of the story take place, and what are some things that happened in the story?